Welcome back to the Draft FC podcast, a podcast, website and YouTube channel dedicated to all things official Draft FPL. My name's Mitch and I'm your host for the game preview, going over waiver options, hidden gems and some general Premier League chat ahead of Gameweek 8. So we draw a line under the second international break and we've got another nice little contained quartet of game weeks now, and game weeks 8, 9, 10 and 11 before the third international break and the final one of 2025. After that, it is into the winter slog period, pretty much through to the January winter break now that teams get. So I think that goes from game week 12 through to game week 21, so about 10 game weeks there, with very little time to pause or to breathe. Obviously, some weeks where there are 2 game weeks, or a few weeks where there are 2 game weeks shoved into one. So, as I've been alluding to, and as I was alluding to before the international break, from about game week 8, we start to see the patterns really emerging. Not for everything, it's not going to be perfect, but in terms of starting to try and sketch out some of the trends longer term, not just for individuals, but for teams and for trends in the FPL game. About from game week 8 is where we can start to really do some maths without it being a waste of time, without the sample size being too small. Obviously, there has been a lot done this international break, 7 game weeks in. I'm seeing a lot of normal FPL content creators out there starting to try and do this, but it is possibly a touch early. I mean, we'd probably get the most bang for our buck in the next international break, but that might be leaving it slightly too long. So I'm going to start having a look through that data from next week, and the quicker I can get that, the sooner I can get that out, I will. But yeah, I think there's some obvious things emerging. Most people are probably picking up on it. There are certain defenders, certain midfielders now who are very much in frame that weren't necessarily high on the agenda last season, seasons before. Otherwise, it's still a lot of the bread and butter stuff in terms of team selections, predicted lineups, who's actually playing week in, week out. Are there any patterns we can start to see here? Are there players who we need to seriously rethink our value on and drop? And in the opposite direction too. Yeah, one of the big jobs I've got for, once this is recorded, edited and out, my big job for this afternoon is going over the full draft rankings on Draft FC. I was supposed to do it 2 weeks ago, and then I've had to do other stuff like go to work, annoying stuff like that. So I haven't really had time to do that, but that is on the to-do list for this afternoon once this is out, and I've already done a little bit of fiddling because there are definitely some big swings at the top, bottom and all over really. There are some big swings. There are some players that aren't even currently in my top 240 that definitely need to be in there, and some that definitely need to be well out of it as well. So that should be fully updated by bedtime tonight. Let's say that by bedtime tonight. But thankfully it's a Friday deadline coming off the back of the international break. So you'll have this evening, tomorrow morning to listen to this before the deadline, which is at the conventional Friday morning time of 11 a.m, Friday the 17th of October, ahead of a conventional Saturday main game week deadline, 11 a.m, before Nottingham Forest against Chelsea, which is the early Saturday lunchtime kickoff. As ever, all of this is subject to change based on team news, injury developments, and press conference info. So take all of it with the usual pinch of salt. There are definitely some tweaks to the predicted lineups that will likely come depending on certain bits of team news. There are some other bits and pieces which I'll cover throughout the episode on the team news and in the predicted lineups that really are in the lap of the gods at the moment, unless you are able to read minds. I don't think anyone really with 100% certainty will be able to give you certain answers, which, as I said, we'll cover in just a few moments. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. Before we do get into the proper stuff, I'll flog it again. Our 1 month free trial is still running. You might have heard me say before the international break to maybe wait until this week to use it, because as I mentioned, we've now got a little tight 4 game week cluster before the next international break. So if you use that free trial code now for a free month, you'll get that full set of 4 game weeks in order to use the site. It's only for new customers. You just use the code KICKOFF at checkout. If you're just signing up on a standard monthly plan, which is normally $3.99 a month, you can cancel anytime. So if you want to get access to all the stats that I use, if you want to see the predicted lineups function with your league ownership, roster stats plumbed in, data center, squad planner, global rankings, plus access to the Draft FC Discord channel, then go ahead and sign up. So a quick look at Waiver Watch. Again, we are looking back a couple of weeks because these were the moves that were happening before Gameweek 7. The players coming in: Alderete, Marmadashvili, Xhaka, Botman, Matheus Nunes, Polina, Fulkrug, Mukiele, and Ghana. Overall, pretty good there. A couple of injuries, which couldn't have been foreseen given the international break now. But yeah, for Game Week 7, pretty reasonable set. The players that were making way: Tyrone Mings, Livramento, Dewsbury Hall, Milenkovic, Ndoye, Williams, Tavernier, and Bernardo. So quite a few jumping off the Nottingham Forest assets. Dewsbury Hall was obviously suspended for that one, so I'm sure we'll see his ownership pick up over the next few weeks. Might not happen this week because they are away to Manchester City. But yeah, I think a pretty reasonable set of ins and outs, as is often the case. So key injuries and suspensions. These are mainly just the ones that we have some firm news or firmish news on. There will definitely be a few others that would be added to this list had we been doing this after all of the press conferences. But as a lot of those are going to happen tomorrow after the deadline, we're just going to have to make do. Odegaard, we got confirmation. He's got an MCL injury, expected to be back after the next international break. So expected to miss about 4 game weeks. Grealish is fine, but he can't play against City because he's still owned by them. Muniz is going to be out until about the international break. Remains to be seen whether he will be fit just before, just after. We're not 100% sure that Raul Jimenez is going to be fit to start this week. That will be some late team news from the press conference. Alisson sounds like he will still be out at least for this game and probably the next one. Konate, still waiting for news on his injury, which happened before the international break. And Livramento, we got confirmation. Similar to Odegaard, will be out until after the November international break. The fixtures for this week, so as I say, kick things off with Forest against Chelsea, which is a real interesting matchup for various reasons. Forest, if they put out a bad performance and get a corresponding bad result, the chatter is that Ange Postecoglou could be sacked already, with Sean Dyche waiting in the wings to come in. What a swing from Nuno to Ange to Dyche in the space of a month. That would be quite the reshuffle there, and Lord knows where their season will end up. For Chelsea, as has been the case probably for the last couple of game weeks now, some question marks on their predicted 11, mainly in defence. It just remains to be seen who's actually fit enough to start. Chalobah missed the last one through suspension, but has played the majority of minutes, so I think he'll be straight back in there. Cucurella's pretty nailed on. So it's then that other centre-back spot. Could be Badiashile, could be Tosin, could be Fofana. Depends who's fancied and who's fit. And then at right back, again, we get a slight knock-on effect with the central midfield area because we've seen Gusto and James both start together, being able to cover the right back and central midfield positions alongside Caicedo. Up top, probably not too difficult to predict. Palmer's still out and Delap's still out. The only coin toss for me at the moment is whether Garnacho starts or Esteval starts, but one of them will. Some question marks for Forest. I think Forest is probably the flip side. I can be fairly confident how they're going to line up at the back, but up top, I've got a couple of one interesting selection in my predicted 11, which is Igor Jesus starting as the number 9. I just get the impression that Ange fancies him more than Wood, and he's probably been waiting for an excuse. Coming off the back of the international break now is a bit of a reset moment. So that's definitely not a prediction I'd nail myself to, but so don't go dropping someone half decent for him. But yeah, I think it's a bit of a coin toss there up front for this game week. Brighton against Newcastle, Burnley Leeds, that is an interesting one. A win for either of those teams will, I'm sure, leave them feeling fairly satisfied with how the opening 8 game weeks have gone. Both of them actually have pretty nice fixtures next week too. Leeds are at home to West Ham, and Burnley are away to Wolves. So if you did go in on a Burnley or a Leeds asset this week, could be someone that you're looking at for game week 9 as well. Palace against Bournemouth, City, Everton, Sunderland, Wolves, Fulham, Arsenal, and then Spurs, Villa, Liverpool United, and West Ham at home to Brentford. Let's get into the main picks then, and you'll see again, probably similar to last game week preview I did, that the lists are getting a lot thinner, and that is because I'm continuing to use just the top 200 leagues for my stats. I'm looking at 10-team league, top 200 leagues. So the ownership stats mean that certain players that used to be showing as pretty low owned, for those engaged managers who are picking up these players that we're looking at, they sort of go right up the scale, and then there's no point me really talking about them. So let's have a look. So in defence, neither of these two, funnily enough, are ones that I'm necessarily saying you should pick up this week. Branthwaite is getting some chatter. We could see him back, it seems, this weekend. Now, obviously, they're going away to City, so you may not want to rush for him anyway. This is more if you just want to get in ahead of the curve. Not one I would be massively clamouring for. They face Spurs in game week 9, away to Sunderland in game week 10. So even if he did come back this weekend, I'm not sure you're necessarily going to be starting him for 2 or 3 game weeks now. And we don't even know he is going to be back. But I know there has been some chatter. The ownership is low. I'm sure it will creep up now as people do look at him. So if you do fancy him, then just consider this a bit of a reminder. For Newcastle, I've put Tior on there, 30% ownership. This is really just a post-it note to talk about the Newcastle defence, pretty similar to Chelsea, some question marks over who's going to start. The difference with someone like Branthwaite is that for Newcastle, there is a half-decent run of games now, so the Newcastle defenders are seemingly quite attractive. They're away to Brighton this week, which isn't the best on paper. They've then got a home game against Fulham, away to West Ham, and away to Brentford, all before the next international break. Now, as we just said, Livramento is going to be out for a few weeks. Hall is also injured. I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head what the detail of that was. I think it was some sort of training ground injury. So that means Trippier is pretty nailed on to continue at right back. It likely means Dan Burn is almost 100% nailed to play at left back. So we've then got Fabian Schär, who we're very familiar with, and we've got Tior, their new centre back from the summer, and we've got Botman as 3 centre backs playing for 2 spots. Now, obviously, we hadn't seen Schär for a few weeks. He went off with a concussion and then he was sort of out of the team. So we saw Botman and Tior playing as a centre-back partnership. So in my predicted 11 for now, that is how I've got it, with Fabian Schär on the bench. It could be any of those 3 who don't play. If the lineups come out Saturday lunchtime and I see that Botman's on the bench or that Tior's on the bench, I would not, it wouldn't raise a massive eyebrow. But if I had to choose, I would suspect they kind of carry on in the same vein that they did before the international break, and that Schär could be benched. The reason that's relevant is because even if I filter 10-team top 200 leagues, Schär's ownership is 94%. So there are a lot of managers out there who have him in their squad who are possibly banking on him to start this weekend, and he may not. So if that applies to you, just something to consider. In midfield, another one, top of the list. Now, I know it's a bit of a running joke with me, this pod, and Dango Rotara. You all know I'm a big fan. Again, this is a bit of a post-it note selection on the screen because I've seen lots of comments, both in our Draft FC Discord, on Reddit, in other places, talking about what to do with it. Now, his ownership isn't huge. If you look at the top 200 leagues, 2/3 plus do not have Dango picked up. He's in the waiver pile. But I know those of you that do have him will have had higher expectations than what he's managed to show already. Interestingly, I'm just going to jump before finishing my point on Dango to Jeremy, the next player on the list, whose roster percentage currently is 10% more. This is a player who is still relatively unknown in the Premier League. Hasn't, despite his efforts, he's probably due one, but despite his efforts, hasn't registered any attacking return in the league so far. And the way that these 2 players are talked about is totally different. You've got people talking about how they can get Jeremy into their squad, whereas Dango, there are people talking about how they can get him out of the squad. Now, fundamentally, that's down to minutes. We have seen Dango Ouattara not start Premier League games, whereas Jeremy, with everyone fit at the moment, seems to be the main one who's going to take take over Eze's spot in that Palace team with Sarr on the other side and Mateta up front. So that's understandable, and that's probably why there is a 10% difference in their roster percentages. But Dango Ouattara is established. He was a record signing for Brentford, and he's versatile. The main reason we haven't seen Dango play every single match for Brentford has largely been structural, but you'd have to say there hasn't really been anything else. As I said right at the start, 7 game weeks, small sample size, but there hasn't been anything that conclusive to me that is saying this flip-flopping of structure and Dango basically being the one coming in and out of the team in favour of adding in another defender has had any bearing on their results. In fact, the last game, so he didn't start against City. They lost. He started the game before at home to United. They won. He didn't start the game before away at Fulham. They lost. He didn't start the game at home against Chelsea, which they only managed a draw as well. Yeah, there's nothing in there that's suggesting Dango's a problem or that they're a better team without him in there. And I think he has to be worked in there as a regular player. For me, the balance isn't looking quite right for Brentford so far, and I think we need to see more of a 4-2-3-1 with Dango playing on the wing. So I would be fully expecting, with an away game at West Ham, a game which they need to be competitive, and this is going to be, if they don't want to get dragged into a relegation battle, a game that they have to win, I don't see how Dango doesn't start. So if you've got Dango and you're trying to look for a way out, if the only reason you're looking for a way out is because you don't think he'll play this week, I would say with as much confidence as I can have, sitting in my house, with no insider information, I'd be very surprised if he doesn't play. So if that's the only reason you're looking to drop him, then maybe give him one more week. Jeremy, as I just mentioned, is another good prospect. He probably is due an attacking return. His underlying stats are pointing that way. And at home to Bournemouth, they should get some opportunities. Next one is Josh Cullen, 42% ownership in those top 200 leagues. An interesting one. He got 6 points last week, got 2 bonus points despite no attacking involvements and not keeping a clean sheet. Got his defensive contributions with a whopping 20 in that game away at Aston Villa. 12 the week before, 14 the week before that. He's now hit the mark of 12 for midfielders in 5 out of the 7 games that they've played so far. He's played 90 minutes. He started and played at least 60 minutes in every single outing. 37 points from 7 game weeks, meaning he's averaging just over 5 points per game week. He's sort of bordering on the must-own tier, really, for 8, 9, 10 team leagues where you've got between 40 and 50 mids taken up at any one time. It's hard to pick. It's hard to pick many that are going to beat that average. Now, obviously, that's partly being propped up by a massive score in game week 2 where he got 14 points. But 6-4-4 in the last 3 game weeks, having picked up all the DEFCON points, is solid. And the only reason I didn't put him in my Fantastic Four slide towards the end is just because he's been in there a couple of times and I was looking to freshen it up a bit. But yeah, home game against Leeds, no reason why he shouldn't hit the mark again. And also a chance at the clean sheet bonus point too. Kluivert's an interesting one for Bournemouth. Ownership is 47% still in top 200 leagues. Came off the bench last time and scored. It's a tricky one. He's another one I've seen mentioned quite a bit in the last few days. No doubt because of his name and his star power, given what we've seen him do last season and the fact that he's probably available for a lot of you. It's another one. I mean, his roster percentage is basically 50%. I'd say that's about the chance of him starting. I think as it stands, I've got him down to pencil in to start in my predicted 11. But again, if the team news comes out and he's on the bench, would not be a massive shock. So yeah, again, one to take with a bit of a pinch of salt. Up top, Raul Jimenez, big ownership, but if he was available and if the team news was positive in terms of injury, then a decent one to pick up. Igor Jesus, the one I mentioned earlier, he's picked up in 2/3 of leagues. So if you agree with me, or if there's any sort of press conference info to suggest that Wood's a bit of a doubt, then could be a nice one to try and punt on. The reason why it's a good punt is because if he starts and if Forest play well, he scores and they won, it's the kind of thing that just cements him in the team. And then Wood becomes the midweek cup number 9, and Igor Jesus becomes the Premier League number 9. So, yeah, but as I said, not one that I put any large amount of money on. And then we heard over the international break that Fulkrug picked up an injury, health surprise, but obviously means that Callum Wilson then enters the conversation more, and his ownership is just over 50%, so it could be worth a pick up too, particularly in larger leagues if he was available in the waivers. Into hidden gems next. So these are all players with less than 10% ownership, staying on 10-team top 200 leagues. In goal, Johnston for Wolves, ownership is just 7%. Seems to be the number one at the moment over Jose Sarr. So yeah, again, particularly for those in larger leagues where you want 2 starting goalkeepers, good one to pick up. For City, Kusnov is at just 8%. Obviously a nice home game against Everton. Missed a few games with injury, but before that we saw him start quite a few on the bounce. So yeah, would not be surprised if we saw him play. Could line up at right back again. And given their fixtures coming up, if he were to play, a nice one to have. Then we've got a few from that Burnley and Leeds fixture. Ekdal and Estev for Burnley and Bogle for Leeds. All of them in for a shout of picking up the defensive contribution points. Probably the Burnley players more so over Bogle, though Bogle did pick those up for the first time in Gameweek 7. He's sort of been on the increase in terms of how many defensive contributions he's been putting up. So we'll see. But if I had to pick any of those, I'd be going for one of the Burnley guys. And then finally, Badiashile, probably a personal preference if you happen to believe that he will be starting alongside Chalobah at centre-back and you want a bit of that Chelsea defence, particularly for not just this weekend, but the weeks ahead as well, then he's there at just 1% ownership, so should be available for the majority of you listening. I'm going a bit back and forth with, as at this very moment, at the time of recording, I've got him penciled into the 11, but I have a feeling if, I'm going to wait and see what Draft FC Kieran says as well. Tosin could end up being in there by the time I fiddle with these later on tonight. Into midfield, Harvey Elliott for Villa. This is like a personal mention, really. All things being equal, probably shouldn't be on the list. He's not nailed on to start. But just Elliott in a Liverpool shirt, for whatever reason, just always seemed to turn it on against Spurs. So I wonder if he did play, whether he's bang up for that game and could get on the score sheet. But that's just a gut thing. And if you ask me, should I pick up Elliott over XYZ, I'd probably just say stick with XYZ. But at least at least when he does score, I can tell you next week that I told you so. Garnacho for Chelsea. I would highly doubt he's in hidden gem territory by the time we do this next week. 8% at the moment. Marino for Arsenal is an interesting one. Just 6% owned. Obviously, Odegaard is out. There are a few ways this could go. They could go to a 4-2-3-1 with Zubimendi and Rice as a double pivot. Move Eze as a number 10 and then play Martinelli or Trossard off the left. More often than not, over the last couple of months, when Odegaard has not been playing, we've seen Marino start. That allows them to play in a more conventional 4-3-3, which I think probably gets the most out of the majority of the players on there. I don't really think Rice is well suited to playing as a playing in a 2. I think he's much better in a midfield 3. But and we know when Marino's on the pitch, one way or another, he scores. He gets on the score sheet. He's very efficient in that regard. So yeah, a tempting one just to consider for a short-term punt. Somerville for West Ham, it's more of an eye test one. He's looked all right the last couple of outings. A nice home fixture in theory against Brentford, and just 4% owned would definitely be differential. Joel Linton, he hasn't returned yet this season, despite playing in every game. We know he's nailed to start. Brighton, we don't really ever know which version of them we're going to get week to week still. Over the last couple of years, over the sort of last 2 or 3 seasons, we expect Joel Linton to get an attacking return, whether that be a goal or an assist, roughly once every 3 games. He's expecting goal involvements, and his underlying stats at the moment are about 1. So he's one who's knocking on the door of getting a return any time now. So yeah, another one, particularly in the larger leagues, if you're scraping the barrel, or if you're looking to cover off a head-to-head matchup, someone that's got Bruno Guimaraes, for example. Then Okafor for Leeds should start again. In theory, it's a good game away at Burnley and just 3% owned. And then for a forward, there is a very slight doubt on Foster. And it seems, though it's not conclusive, because we've seen a little bit of Fleming as well, but it would seem at the moment, on a like-for-like basis, if Foster's not fit, that Breuer will probably start instead. So again, probably one for the big leagues out there. If he was on the waivers, could be worth a pickup. Let's do the Fantastic Four section then. So these are players who are generally very low owned, who I think can scrape a very respectable 4 points in the upcoming game week. If we look back to last game week, Rodon was a bust, just the 1 point, though did hit the post early on from chance, so he could have been a big score. Mukiele got 3. Ampadu did sort of do what we needed him to do. He got the defensive contribution points, but get a yellow card, which ended up putting him down to 3. And Florentino, who is probably the most bankable DEFCON merchant in the game at the moment, did hit 4. It means we've got a pretty miserable season record so far. 6 out of 20 have hit the 4 points. We're kind of clinging to a respectable average of 3.55 points per pick, but we do need a big week. So as I said, Florentino staying on there. He could be on there for the foreseeable. His ownership in top 200 leagues remains 0%. If we look at the last 3 game weeks, which is basically since Florentino became a starter, he's only started the last 3 games for Burnley. In that time, he has got 42 defensive contributions, 18, 12, and 12. 4-4-3 in terms of the points that he's managed to put up. He only got a 3 in the game against Forest because he got a yellow card. So for the big leagues, he is getting towards Cullen territory. And in fact, if you look at just the last 3 game weeks, him and Cullen are head and shoulders above the rest, which is quite phenomenal. Because you'd think if a player like Cullen was getting that many defensive contributions, that it would probably take away a share from all of the other from his teammates. So the fact that there are 2 of them there, able to churn out those kind of numbers, number one tells you how Burnley are playing these days. But it's so reliable at the moment, so I have to put him in there again. Ampadu is another one who's super reliable, so he's back on there too. Bentancur for Spurs, if he starts, has been pretty reliable. He hasn't hit it in every game, but the thing with Bentancur, he can always pop up with a bit of a rogue goal. And again, if we're just looking in recent game weeks, for me, I guess, a bit of a random name. It's not someone I can really imagine I've talked about for a good while now. Not one that really gets into the conversation of the big sort of defensive contribution merchants like Tarkovsky's, Anderson, Senesi, Richards, the Palace defenders, people like that. But Mavropanos over the last few game weeks is well up there. In fact, I think he's above some of those names that I just mentioned. And in game week 7 away at Arsenal, again, he put up a whopping 20 defensive contributions too. Before that, 7, 11, and 11. So he's hit it in 3 out of the last 4. I think the thing that's sort of pegging Mavropanos back a little bit is, number 1, West Ham can't really keep a clean sheet. And number 2, the West Ham defenders are often getting a -1 for the number of goals that they're conceding. But for this home game against Brentford are a team that, we know like to try and break and get crossed into the box when they are up the pitch. So should represent chances for him to get plenty of clearances and things on the board. So they are the Fantastic Four for next week, and we'll obviously recap them again in the Game Week 9 preview. So that is it. Keep an eye on the predicted lineups. They're there, whether you remember or not. If you just search Draft FC predicted lineups, say a lot of changes will be, a lot of factors will be dependent on some of the press conference news. The other thing is, coming out of an international break, there will be players who you have absolutely no idea who've picked up a bit of a strain or a bit of a niggle, who just return absolutely knackered, who get a random benching at the weekend. So we do have to always contend with that. So definitely the kind of game week where you want your first bench player to be fairly safe to come on. So that will do for this episode. Another final reminder, if you haven't ever signed up at the site before and you want to have a try for free, just use the code KICKOFF for a standard monthly plan. You'll be able to get a 1-month free trial, full access, including access to the Discord server. New customers only. Go and check us out. Otherwise, if you are a fan of the pod, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening. Like, share, subscribe, comment, all of that business. It helps get us out there. If you do comment with any questions, again, I'll set a arbitrary deadline that if you do comment a question about your team before close of play tonight, I'll endeavour to reply, particularly for those of you on YouTube. Anything that you comment last minute tomorrow before the deadline, I'll be at work. So unless I get a spare 10 minutes to go through them, I can't guarantee that I'll get to them before the deadline. If you're on social media, give us a follow. We're probably most prevalent on X at draft_FC. Do occasionally pop up on Reddit, but I'm trying to narrow my focus a little bit because otherwise it's trying to respond to questions has been too many plates. So yeah, best of luck ahead of game week 8. Do have a little look at the kind of next 3 or 4 games and look at them as a little package deal before we can breathe again with the next international break. As I said, I will now be pestering Taz for certain bits of data, doing some trawling myself to see what trends we can maybe look to really project from game week 8 down to game week 38. And we'll get those sandwiched in somewhere in one of the upcoming game week previews. But yeah, good luck. Otherwise, until next time, stay shook.